Okay, so moving on, I also wanted to discuss learning styles. So this is distinct from the intelligences and ways of knowing that I've covered so far. But they're not completely, but they're very related, let's just say. So the learning styles are pretty simple. They're visual, auditory, and tactile. A visual learner might be someone who needs to see an example happen before they do it. They want to see what you're talking about. An auditory person is somebody who's comfortable listening. So in those cases, somebody would be able to just listen to a lecture, or lectures would be more comfortable to an auditory learner. And then tactile is somebody who needs to do it themselves. They're more comfortable with hands-on learning and that sort of thing. So those are the three basic categories of learning styles. I then wanted to kind of touch on learning outcomes. And these also are not directly linked. Outcomes are not categorized by a learning style, but what is going to happen or what the result is how learning outcomes are formed. So we've talked, I think, a little bit about this, or you've had some readings that touched on it. But the three types of learning outcomes, the three major ones, are cognitive, affective, and behavioral. So the cognitive is basically just knowledge. So I can memorize something, and that will have, or if the goal is or the outcome is to memorize something, or understand something, or learn something, that's a cognitive outcome. It's all staying in my head. If I need to feel something, which we're doing some of this in this class, right? We're kind of through the self-reflexivity exercises. I want you to know some things, but I also want you to feel some things. I kind of want you to struggle, right, with your own cultural starting points and how they're different and how you were socialized, and to feel some different things about that. So any of these kind of psychological approaches would lend themselves to a more effective learning outcome. And then the third is behavioral. What are you going to do, or what do I want you to do at the end of this class? So if I wanted you to conduct a training and videotape it and bring it back, you would have demonstrated to me that you could do a training. We're not going to do that in this class, just given the complication of it and setting it up within a 10-week parameter. But that would be a good example of a behavioral outcome. The Bloom's taxonomy, I'll go through real quickly. So Bloom's just kind of breaks down these learning outcomes a little bit more, and they fall kind of within some different types of those three categories, behavioral, affective, and cognitive. And I think that they're related, or they describe them in the reading that I shared with you. But again, Bloom's works for us for a couple of different reasons. One of the best ways, and one way the most instructors use Bloom's, is just to identify some good learning outcome words to use. And in the reading that you have on Bloom's, you see, like, under remembering, there's all of these different verbs to describe different types of remembering that could be an outcome for something. The same for understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So the only thing I really need to say on Bloom's, and we can discuss it a little more this week, is originally Bloom came up with this as kind of a hierarchy of learning. So you almost needed to do remembering first, and then understanding, and then applying, and then analyzing, and then evaluating, and then creating. And it's kind of this higher order of learning outcomes. And the higher order piece of it is still kind of in touch, but Bloom's has mostly been discounted for the sequencing of it, just because you could say do you really need to evaluate something before you can create something. You know, can applying something be as thoughtful and as high order as creating something? That's kind of where the controversy around Bloom's has been. But Bloom's is still a very effective tool for understanding what exactly you want your learners to do. At what level are you asking them to do things? So I can look at this class and say, really, even though there's some baseline remembering and understanding, most of what we're doing in this class is applying, analyzing, and evaluating. And of course, your final project is creating your own intercultural training. So we're operating, because this is a graduate class, in those higher levels. Well, quote unquote, now I'm using the higher level thing. In those higher ones that Bloom identified. And so I would want to go through, and when I'm identifying learning outcomes for the class, I'd want to use some of the verbs that he uses within some of those different things. So that's how Bloom's is best used. And let's see here.